This is a reading of ForeverGreen, Plant Life Long After You're Gone. Copyright 2025, Mark Stephen Nordlund. All rights reserved. This is a Boohouse Books book. Boohousebooks.com. Earl K. Pike was an angry man. Likely, this was due to the fact that he was balding at the age of 35, his favorite pair of athletic fit khakis no longer fit, and his cat no longer found him interesting. Even more likely, his anger could have derived from the fact that after a decade of loveless marriage, his wife Maggie refused to send him a returning text message. Earl stood just outside the busy restrooms of WellSave Warehouse. The oversized store was a membership-based supply club that sprawled out over 20 acres of used-to-be desert in southern Arizona. He looked out into the sea of bargain-hungry faces as he searched for his wife, with no immediate triumph. Two women fought over the last vegan-friendly air fryer in the home goods department. A man was using his child's agility to reach a can of weight loss powder, and a WellSave associate manning the service desk was retaking a member's photo that developed out of focus for the 7th time. Alas, no Maggie. Grunting in his throat, Earl reached into the pocket of his drawstring stretch pants and pulled his phone. His fatty thumb tapped a "Where are you?" message to his spouse in frustration-laden vein. He knew she wouldn't respond. Earl wondered if his number still held residence in her contact list at all. Recent history gave strong credit to that suspicion. Commencing the long tour he always took when searching for Maggie and WellSave, he started through the pharmacy. After 11 minutes and a shortening emotional fuse, he found her long red braid and green tank top in the floral department. Earl's fuse burned down to a nub. Typical, he thought. Maggie was, and always had been, an anthophile. Earl approached his wife and stood beside her. A group of women surrounding them eagerly watched a wide-eyed sales rep demonstrate a new useless product. Above her, a wide banner displayed the words, "ForeverGreen Growth Booster." In a tight emerald apron, the rep spoke loudly and fulgently. "Your Flora babies deserve only the best, and ForeverGreen's new life-extending formula will keep your begonias, bee balms, and bulbs flourishing, fit and fabulous long after you're planted in the ground with them." Earl stewed with agitation. The rep was obviously regurgitating from a corporate script she had committed to memory. And like every woman Earl had ever known, his wife Maggie was a sucker for new product pitches delivered in this fashion, especially when relating to plants. He could feel his bank account draining as the pitch went on. "Just 1 teaspoon a day of ForeverGreen's growth booster hormone is all it takes to empower the only family member in your household who lacks the ability to bark, hiss, or squawk when things get rough." The group of women sickeningly laughed at the pun, including Maggie. The words, "Plant Mama," showed prominently in white across her lime-green chest. Earl turned his nose to his wife and spoke quietly. "Water and dirt, that's all your plants need. You dash them with enough chemicals to cause another Chernobyl." Abruptly, the sales rep pointed at him directly. She must have somehow heard his gripe. "That is a common misconception, sir," she smiled. The Garden of Eden was crawling with every species of animal, defecating their individual and unique enzymes into the soil, optimal and crucial for perfect vegetation health. The miniature crowd nodded in agreement and fascination. The woman smiled again. "We all know what happened after that, don't we?" she asked rhetorically. Laughter once again erupted from the group. Earl cringed at the irony. The biblical event the sales rep had referred to involved a woman causing the fall of mankind and humanity's expulsion from grace. He didn't bother to comment on the observation. He was vastly outnumbered, and had already tarnished his reputation. "How much is this going to cost us?" he asked Maggie. "Quiet," she hushed. "She's getting to that." He winced. A price revealed in closing was never a good sign. His hypothetical bank balance circled the metaphorical drain. Earl handled the finances in their home. Since his marriage to Maggie, she was left out of the stress and responsibility of balancing a checkbook as a mercy. Earl figured it was his duty as a husband to take on the burden of money distribution himself. Over time, her obliviousness and carefree spending had become a problem. The saleswoman retrieved a tube the size of silicone caulk and presented it with the label facing outward. "A 10-ounce supply of ForeverGreen's growth booster will last 30 days for medium-sized potted plants." A green star-shaped tag on the tube read $79.95, plus the cost of application gun. Earl rolled his eyes and groaned. She set the tube aside, reached under the folding table, and hoisted a white bucket with the same label onto the polyethylene surface. "However, we strongly recommend the economy size for shrubs, gardens, and all of the in-ground family members you're lovingly responsible for and helping to reach their full potential." The bucket wasn't marked with a price. Earl dropped his nose, slapped a palm against his forehead, and died with despondency. The woman continued. "Before I open up the floor for sales, I am obligated by ForeverGreen Co. and our agreement with the EPA to warn and urge you not to combine ForeverGreen Growth Booster with any other branded or non-branded supplement, stimulant, or additive." She paused oddly. "This is a strict instruction that must be adhered to," she added. "That's one way to weed out the competition," Earl mumbled. "Enough," Maggie spat. The rep bloomed with a sunbeam grin. "Now, who's ready for forever life with healthy, long-lasting ForeverGreen?" she announced. Immediately, excitement erupted from the crowd as women pulled out purses, wallets, and credit cards. An avid line formed before the saleswoman as Maggie and her sisterhood of anthophiles ravenously purchased armfuls, cartfuls, and pallets of ForeverGreens, fresh off the market, growth-boosting hormone supplement. Earl stood in his kitchen. Same tie-string sweats and same worn-out clogs. The room smelled of fresh dirt and mineral growth formula. He sliced a piece of coffee cake from a clear plastic clamshell. The coffee maker coughed and bubbled as a new pot was brewed. Steps away, Maggie stood diligently over what used to be their kitchen table and her ever-growing collection of potted flowers. She emptied old soil and repotted daffodils, primroses and orchids, whispering kind words and supportive phrases to them as her hands moved. The brewer finished. Earl took a semi-clean mug from a nearby cupboard and filled it with steaming coffee. He watched her work and talk to her plants. Maggie was seldom clear of dirt smudges and earth-covered hands. Her clothes resembled a child's who had just come inside after making mud cakes in a rainy yard all day. She smelled of wet grass, musty earthworms, and ammonia. Her swift pace and work ethic was similar to a chemical engineer's, industriously working on an end-all cure for Alzheimer's and earning her a Nobel Prize. Her focused expression matched. Maggie treated every plant as equal to herself and cared for them all with the same delicate attention. Her crown jewel was a sunspot dwarf sunflower. It sat at the center of the table and commanded the most attention after winning her a gardening award, issued by an online magazine. The sunflower was her most coveted possession, and its needs were tended to on an hourly basis. It stood at the top of Maggie's priority list in any situation, with her husband left arbitrarily at the bottom. Maggie hadn't always been obsessed with plants. There was a time long ago when Earl held top precedence in her life, and all kind words would be whispered to him. Back when he had all of his hair and his clothes fit. Over time, Maggie's attention shifted to lovers who didn't complain, judge, or criticize. In their 12 years of marriage, he had lost his wife to younger, thinner, and more agreeable suitors. Lovers that didn't bark, hiss, or squawk. "Why do you have to repot them all?" Earl squawked. Maggie stood and shook her long, crimson bangs out of her face. "Weren't you listening?" she snapped. "We can't mix ForeverGreen with any other additives." Earl bobbed his head, remembering the instructions, and the odd look on the rep's face when she had given them. "They want to own the monopoly on what you keep in your chemical collection, huh? Tactical move," he remarked. She ignored his sarcasm. "We're getting more ForeverGreen sometime this week," she commanded. "I want to plant oleanders in the yard, the ones I saw at Kipley's." Before Earl could object to additional spending, he noticed movement in the corner of his view. In the sink, a cockroach climbed out of the drain and approached a previously used cake plate and crusty fork. "Gah!" he shrieked. Earl took a brand new bottle of drain cleaner from below and doused it into the sink. The roach slipped down the pipe as he ran hot, scalding water as a chaser. Noxious steam plumed into the air. "Does that new magic formula keep bugs from infesting the kitchen too? Our house is turning into a roach commune," he complained. His hatred for unwelcome insects was almost as strong as his disdain for her unwelcome plants. Maggie continued to work and whisper affectionate words. Earl's temperature rose. "You know, it doesn't matter what you say to them," he clamored. "It's carbon dioxide either way, and we breathe all the time in the house. Talking to them directly isn't some kind of adrenaline boost for weeds." Maggie's dirt-covered fists clenched. She swung her head around as her long braid slapped against the table. "I told you to never use that word around them. They're not weeds, and I'd thank you kindly to please use some respect when referring to my petal babies." Earl slapped the water to a stop beside the open bottle of cleaner. He petulantly took a sip of coffee and a bite of cake from a clean fork. "Petal babies," he repeated. "Unbelievable." He marveled at her stupidity, then took another bite. Earl often wondered if his wife's detachment from reality would one day drive him to the end of his rope and plunge him headlong into mental instability. It seemed inevitable. The tension in the room was jerked into panicked alarm as Maggie gasped at the sight of something on the table. "Oh my God!" Her voice shook. Earl almost choked on his cake. Shaking loose dirt from her hands, she carefully took a fallen leaf from beside a pot and eyed it with disdain. What's wrong now?" he belted. Maggie turned on her heel, stepped to her husband's feet, and held the miniature leaf inches from his nose. He chewed like a disinterested cow. "What does that look like to you?" she growled. He examined it carelessly. "Mulch?" he dismissively guessed. Maggie stomped her ankle-socked foot onto the linoleum floor with a clap. "Teeth marks!" she shouted. Earl noticed small bite holes in the green leaf. He shook his head with vexation. "Your stupid cat is eating my babies!" she roared. "You leave Bella out of this!" he bellowed. "She's done nothing to you and she's not eating your flowers!" He angrily gestured to the table. "And how do you even know it was attached when she got to it? It likely fell off before she chewed it," he argued. Her brow furrowed. "I take good care of my herb children. Nothing falls off of them. If it did, it means I'm not doing my job as a flower mom." "Flower mom?" Earl mocked. "You need to stop talking like that. You're starting to sound like one of those dog psychos." Maggie shot him a look of lividity. "Or one of those cat psychos?" she retaliated. Earl took the leaf from her fingers and held it in front of her. His hand trembled with malice. "Bella is a living, breathing mammal like you and me." His tone was soft, but sore. "Your weeds are in the same genetic gene pool as the mold that forms on the inside of our toilets in mid-July." He spat. She pushed his hand out of her face and smiled coldly through her teeth. "And yet they bring me more joy than you've ever given me," she hissed. His face went white, Earl's brain inflamed with a fuming churn of indignancy, and yet he said nothing. Like most women, Maggie's emotions often swayed from one extreme to the next, laying behind a wake of words she hadn't actually meant in the heat of passion. Earl could usually dismiss these words through understanding. But not today. Not after what she had just said. He took his cup, took the cake from the plate, and tossed the dish into the wet sink, smashing it to pieces and making her jump with dark surprise. Without further discussion, he left the kitchen and collapsed into a weathered recliner in front of a wall-mounted television in the living room. Maggie timidly went back to her flowers as her husband sharply snatched the remote and illuminated the TV. Across the carpet and beside a tall lamp, Bella laid on her back, staring at him as he fumed. The lazy cat had an orange coat with white stripes. Her ivory paws seemed as though they had been dipped in white paint. Earl caught sight of her and smiled warmly. Unamused, Bella flipped, faced the other direction, and ignored the gesture. In addition to his wife, Earl had almost forgotten that even his living, breathing house cat found no joy in his existence. Maggie silently finished with the inside plants and hauled 2 more buckets of ForeverGreen into the kitchen from the garage. She slid open the back door and began repotting the larger species of her nursery on her makeshift patio greenhouse. Not a word was spoken between them for the rest of the evening and into the night. Earl woke just after midnight. His room was small, dark, and sweltering. Years ago, he had moved into the guest room due to Maggie's constant complaints about snoring. The complaints hadn't surfaced until his waistline began to increase. Now the guest room was Earl's room. His clothes laid scattered across the floor, draped over the furniture, and folded into neat stacks on the opposite side of the bed. No posters or pictures covered the walls, and no decor was present to speak of. Earl liked it this way. He wouldn't call himself boring, just simple, unneeding, and easy to please. Perhaps that fact, in itself, made him uninteresting. He sat up, stood, and yawned. Since the move into his new room, he would wake at this time every night, stewing over the past, analyzing his life's present state, and yearning for times that once were. Months ago, he decided to replace the stewing with coffee, the analyzing with cake, and the yearning with television. The habit was far less depressing, and the nightly routine served him much-needed happy time without Maggie's cold shoulder or ridicule. Earl stepped into the hall, descended the stairs, and entered the kitchen. He snapped the lights on. The scent of drain cleaner and the presence of broken ceramic in the sink was still present from hours before. On the kitchen garden table, Bella gnawed vigorously on a small branch of Maggie's violet perennials. The tiny stems snapped and twisted between the feline's gnashing molars. Earl grinned. "Good girl," he whispered. As the cat chewed, he placed a filter in the coffee machine and filled it with grounds. With a click, he switched on the device as it popped and gurgled. Earl leaned against the counter in his 2-piece pajamas and glared with a narky scorn at the arrangement of blooming colors that had replaced him as a life partner. He scoffed at their impeccable beauty and thought on his wife's formidable and cruel words. Sadness battled with anger under his receding hairline and shiny head. The coffee continued to bubble. Out of curiosity, Earl approached the table, lifted a bucket of growth booster, and looked down his nose at the label. "ForeverGreen," he read out loud. "Plant life, long after you're gone." He turned the bucket and read from the fine print, Water-soluble, all-purpose plant supplement for extended life and overall health and wellness. Below the description, a paragraph in red caught his attention. Do not mix with any other supplements, formulas, or additives. Some ingredients may remain unidentified and/or unlisted until patent maturity, per ForeverGreen Company and the Environmental Protection Agency. His forehead wrinkled. The hell does that mean? He mumbled. Bella meowed, interrupting him. Earl turned his attention to the cat, rested the bucket on the floor, and attempted to place his hand on her furry head. Now you want to talk to me, you fuzzy little rascal? Before he could finish his phrase, Bella pulled backward, hissed savagely, and leapt from the table, vanishing into the dark of the living room. Earl glanced in the direction she had disappeared. We used to be pals, he called out. The coffee maker finished its brewing cycle and steamed to a slow stop. As he readied his mug and poured a hot cup, the open bottle of drain cleaner beside the sink caught his eye. His sights moved over the lengthy warning label, brightly printed in yellow across green plastic. Earl paused as his thoughts stirred. Maggie's painful words, her coveted weeds, the $600 he had spent on growth formula, and even the hateful cat piled in his head like weighted stones stacked one by one atop a curse-spitting witch. Earl had taken far more than he could bear over the years, and the emotions he had buried deep in the grave of his memory began to gestate, take root and sprout from mere thought to physical action. He took the toxic cleaning product by the handle and sniffed the sharp, deadly scent of the open top. Bella entered the kitchen and meowed again, presumably looking for a midnight snack. Earl looked down at her. Let's just see what ForeverGreen does with a little competition, he said, with a sinister smirk. Earl sauntered over to his wife's tabletop garden and simpered with amusement as he dosed every pot with a generous amount of sodium hydroxide, caustic oxidizer, and hypochlorite. Bella curiously watched as he poisoned every petunia, begonia, and marigold, adding an even heftier dose to Maggie's prized sunflower at the crown of the table. Smiling madly, he unlocked the sliding glass door and flipped on the patio lights. He did the same to the array in her makeshift greenhouse. Every beloved petal baby was sabotaged with malignant drain cleaner and left to absorb the lethal substance and left to die within hours of his vengeful exploit. He tossed the empty bottle into the kitchen recycling bin and filled Maggie's daisy-printed watering can with the tap of the sink. One by one, he dissolved the poison with a light sprinkle of water, making sure that every indoor and outdoor pot was primed with H2O and laced with imminent death. Earl returned the watering can to the floor and reveled at his deed. From his feet, Bella howled again. I know, he concurred happily. Mags is going to be mighty pissed when she wakes up in the morning, he chuckled. Earl didn't feel a modicum of remorse, and actually looked forward to his wife's reaction to the massacre in 7 short hours. More than enough time for the additive to work its magic and show visually through wilting, discoloration, and decay. I'll tell you what, he remarked to the cat. He pulled a can of Maggie's dolphin-safe vegan tuna from the cupboard and removed the top with a steel opener. You keep your furry little mouth shut. He dumped a fresh helping of fish into her cat bowl. And I'll let you chow down on this bribe, he said. Bella eagerly consumed the tuna, as Earl was finally permitted, after many years of resistance, to pet her. His eyes opened. Beams of harsh sunlight emitted through the blinds and cast hot, mid-morning stripes across his plain, white bedsheet. The house was silent, and the position of the sun suggested late morning. Earl threw the warm sheet from his PJs and touched his bare feet to the hickory floor. Coming to life, Earl rubbed his eyes and mentally revisited the events from just after midnight. Maggie usually woke before 8. He should have woken up to screaming, crying, some kind of outburst if the poison had taken effect. The quiet was odd. Sharply, Earl heard a metallic clank through his guest room window, followed by falling taps of wood. He stood, parted the blinds, and squinted through the biting sun. In the yard, just beyond the porch, Maggie was lining a row of newly purchased oleander bushes wrapped in burlap against the perimeter fence. A wheelbarrow filled with hand tools rested on the grass beside a rake, hoe and steel shovel. Earl's face twisted with perplexity. He departed from the room, jogged down the stairs, and beheld the kitchen. He quivered with frustration. Maggie's potted babies sat happily upon the table and exhibited no visible change. He stood over them, examining their obvious state of vigor and wellness. They almost appeared healthier than the day before. Blooming buds, crisp, hydrated edges, and strong, hearty stems. He couldn't even find evidence of where Bella had chewed on the perennials. Irately, Earl leaned over the trash and retrieved the bottle of poison. The 4 paragraphs just above the number to poison control assured that the product could kill almost anything. He huffed through his nostrils and irritably dropped the container, returning it to the bin. In addition to the new oleanders, Maggie had purchased several bags of topsoil, a new pair of boots, and hedge clippers. The items were neatly stacked by the glass door, and a lengthy receipt exhibiting the Kipley's logo rested on the counter. He sickeningly refused to look upon the amount she had spent. The wholesome state of the plants he had attempted to assassinate was enough turmoil and grief for one morning. Evidently, a new plant was added to her tabletop collection as well. Why the hell not? He thought bitterly. The new orange flowers glowed brightly with white stripes and petal tips that looked as if they'd been dipped in bright white paint. The coloring reminded him of Bella. On that thought, Earl dragged his body over to the pantry, pulled a bag of cat chow from a shelf, and filled her dish. The cockroach returned from the drain and watched the melancholy man go through the motions of his meaningless existence, exit the kitchen, and return to his room to dress. On top of bringing joy to no one and becoming the most boring human being on earth, Earl K. Pike was also a failure. The next 30 minutes went the way of every morning. Coffee, cake, his chair, and the TV. Earl took a bite and a sip, viewing an infomercial for some kind of new face mask that retained hydration, absorbed caloric intake, and gave your complexion a dewy and youthful appearance. He arbitrarily flipped through the channels. Every station wanted to sell him something and offered no entertainment on a Saturday morning filled with gloom and despair. He glanced to the floor beside the lamp. Bella was not in her usual place. The observation made him wary. Pulling his phone from his drawstring pocket, he shot a text to Maggie. "Have you seen Bella this morning?" He'd get nothing in return. He wondered why he sent her messages at all. Perhaps hope still lingered in the recesses of his expectations. After 4 long minutes with no return reply, that hope wilted and fell to decay. Out of vain curiosity, he composed another message. "You're spending too much money. I'm closing our account and taking your debit card." He tapped send. 6 minutes passed. Earl laughed to himself, staring at his decade-long, one-sided string of texts to his wife. He tapped again. "You're a cruel woman, and I poured extra-strength drain clear into all of your weeds last night." Why the hell not? He thought. It was now apparent that she had never even observed his texts to begin with. The doorbell made him jolt in his seat. The alert was followed by a strong knock at the front door. Earl set his mug aside and rocked to his feet. The man at the door was dressed professionally in a blue and yellow uniform and held a long pesticide sprayer. "Pike?" he asked. "Yes," he replied, his voice still scratched with morning grog. "We're doing your weekly treatment, in-home and perimeter of the house?" he announced in the form of a question. "Yeah, come on in," he welcomed. The man pulled out a smartphone with a hefty case and read from it as he entered. "Says here, we spray for cockroaches in the bathrooms, but not the kitchen or rear porch. Is that right?" Earl was reminded of the strict specifics put in place by his wife and her paranoia about pest control spraying anything near her precious babies. He looked over his shoulder towards the kitchen. Silence loomed through the interior of his house. "Actually," he started, "let's do everything today." "The entire home, inside and out?" the man queried. "Yeah," Earl said. "Everything. Spray everything." The tech made adjustments to the previous instructions in his records with a few swift taps. "Okay, sounds good," he chimed. He pushed the phone into his back pocket and proceeded up the stairs to begin with the hall bathroom. "Treatment should only take about 10 minutes, then I'll be out of your hair." Earl fell back into his chair. "No problem. Take your time," he replied courteously. He took a bite and a sip of coffee. "And let me know if you see an orange cat," he added. In retrospect, Earl wondered why he mentioned his cat's color. If he saw a cat, it wouldn't matter what color it was. Bella was the only feline in the house. He dwelled on her unusual absence. Typically, Bella was only in 2 places, the kitchen and her place by the lamp. Even her litter box was kept beside the pantry. There was no reason she'd be anywhere else in the home. The longer he thought about it, the more he began to worry. White stripes, he thought to himself. Earl remembered Maggie's new plant. Curiously, he stood and walked into the kitchen, standing over the new addition to the table. The stunning orange flowers and ivory details of their curling petals were uncanny to Bella's fur pattern. He lifted the pot from the table and examined it closely. The scent of salted fish wafted past his nose and made him sick with bizarre confusion. His mind raced with unreasonable conclusions and anxiety. Boots thundered down the oak staircase. Earl placed the pot back onto the table as the tech made his way past the kitchen and into the first-floor toilet. Still riddled with questions, Earl floated into the living room and sat. He stared blankly at the televised ad for gluten-free nail polish remover as the pest control tech entered the kitchen and resumed his light sprays of bug killer. He treated the floor beneath the cupboards, under the oven, and along the glass exit to the rear deck. Earl heard the back door slide open and then close. The same would be done with the greenhouse patio. For 5 minutes, Earl waited to hear some kind of squabble take place. If Maggie caught the tech spraying anywhere near her pots, he would certainly hear her high-pitched squeals and shrieking objections. Immediately, it would be followed by another one of her angry rants directed at him. Only calm silence ensued as he drank from his mug. The kitchen glass slid open again and shut. The tech returned, uninhibited. "I'd like to come back tomorrow with a different solution to apply another treatment and lay out some traps, if you don't mind," he said sharply. "Another treatment?" Earl asked curiously. The man tapped notes into his phone. "You've got a roach infestation under your porch due to the aphids, spider mites, and whiteflies in your above-ground garden." Earl's expression went flat with ire. "The patio?" he growled. "That's correct," he verified. "You have roaches getting into the home from below the patio, and they're attracted to your indoor garden as well." Earl steamed with aggravation. "Not to worry," the man continued. "After a few more treatments with a new roach formula we've been using more frequently, you should see the matter clear up in a matter of weeks." He smiled and held his phone outward, presenting the screen to Earl. He cursed under his breath, fueled with animosity toward his wife as he signed on the digital line. The man pocketed the phone. "Same time tomorrow," he chirped. Earl opened the door for the tech. He watched as he made his way down the concrete path, past the garage and headed for the marked white van across the street. Earl used every resistance he could muster to keep from slamming the door. He always knew the roaches were an increasing problem, but he had always assumed that their growing numbers were a result of changing climate, the time of year, or even the constellation of the stars. Earl had never once thought that his pest problem was a direct consequence of Maggie's overzealous green thumb and obsession with inanimate life. He knocked his head against the closed door, bathing in resentment. He pulled out his phone. "I hate you. I want a divorce." He tapped in their ignored conversation. "Strike that. I want you dead." Earl sent the second message and felt a hint of remorse as it was sent at light speed, reflected off a nearby satellite and delivered directly to her phone. The remorse festered within him. Insults were one thing, suggesting divorce, and more so, her death, was borderline psychopathic. The patio door slid open and slapped closed. Earl was jerked from his thoughts. Maggie's footsteps quaked into the living room. Her face was covered in dirt, sweat, and what looked like outrage. She aggressively removed her gardening gloves. "So what's that all about?" she thundered. Confused, Earl looked down at the message he had just sent. He became nauseous. Regret seized him by the throat and burned the pit of his stomach. Had she actually seen the message? And all the others? He kept his response neutral. "What's what all about?" He deflected. Her voice became soft. She motioned her overworked hand toward the kitchen. "The orange pixie lilies," she squeaked. Wide prodigy and a childlike wonder showed in her bright eyes through the dingy smudges of topsoil. Her smile warmed him. "Where on earth did you find dwarf lilies with petunia stripes?" she asked in awe. Earl just stood at a crossroads, speech impaired by a conflict of emotions. His fury towards her was still pumping through his veins. However, she hadn't looked at him like that in years. Many years. He spoke. "I just thought they looked nice," he mumbled. Maggie jumped on her toes. Her braid swayed gleefully behind her moisture-drenched back. "I love them," she shrieked happily. She ran to her husband and wrapped her earth-encrusted arms around his neck. "Thank you," she clamored. Earl slowly and hesitantly returned the embrace. She smelled like the death of the rainforest, but the gratitude and affection she exhibited brought about feelings in him he had almost completely forgotten. His anger was still present, but for the moment, he gladly set it aside. Maggie drew backward and joyously pulled out her phone. Earl became nervous. She opened an application and showed him a photo she had taken of the lilies above an endless string of likes and comments. "I posted them on Budsnap this morning." She flipped the phone around, scrolling down the post. "Flowerchild312 says that they might be an orange pixie crossbreed with a Swiss dancer and a red star," she exclaimed. Her eyes landed on him again. "Where did you buy them? Everyone in my thread is dying to know." Earl's eyes shifted as he searched for a lie. He tried to remember the name of any nursery they had visited over the past several months, but no name came to memory. However, if he recalled every explosive argument that had taken place between them in public, a long list of crystal-clear garden centers came to mind. "Wilson's Growers and Landscape," he said quickly. "You found them at Wilson's?" Her face lit up with inspiration as she sent the word out to almost 100 interested anthophiles. She pushed the device into her front denim pocket and hugged him again. Earl felt a loving fondness in her tight, adoring grasp. Her second embrace dislodged tender memories, moments between them from before the fights, before the resentment, and before the plants. They flooded into his head and made his heart hum with a slowly cultivating bliss. Perhaps he had not been replaced as he had thought. Maybe he had just fallen out of touch with what made her happy. It was possible that if he participated a little more in her interests and showed a little more support, things could go back to the way they were. And that is what Earl K. Pike wanted more than anything else in the world. Maggie released him and clapped her hands together. "Okay," she beamed brightly. "I have today's roster all planned out, and I've already taken care of lots of items on the list. I'm really going to need your help today," she announced. Earl's gut twisted at the thought of yard work. He assumed that's what she was referring to. "I went out this morning and got those oleander trees, but I already planted them so you won't have to get dirty today." He deflated with relief. Another opportunity for confrontation averted. She continued, "I called WellSave and ordered a small pallet of ForeverGreen, just in case they didn't have it all in stock. I figured I already gave it to my babies. Why neglect my trunk toddlers, you know?" Earl's neck trembled as he reluctantly raised his brow and nodded in false agreement. Furious goosebumps tingled across his arms and thinning scalp. "Oh, also," she snapped, "our debit card stopped working, so I checked Zonabank to see if we were eligible for any credit cards. And guess what?" His eyes widened with feigned positive anticipation. "Visa cleared us for a $7,000 limit," she shrieked. "The card comes in about a week, but I already put the ForeverGreen on the digital card they sent me. We can pick up the pallet today." She cheered happily. Maggie jumped again, hugged him a third time, and raced into the kitchen. "I'm gonna shower quick, then we can head out." "You're the greatest, hun!" Only a husk was left of Earl as he stood on the carpet. Every good feeling that had grazed him from moments before was dead, buried and memorialized on a stone epitaph covered in flowering vines and years of monetary debt. The regret about the spiteful messages he had sent her were reduced to mulch, right along with it. Earl stoically followed his enthusiastic wife as she filled an oversized cart with a spree of garden-variety purchases. A new watering can, copper-infused gloves, more hand tools, and an $80 gardening apron rested in their stash and threatened to max out their brand-new Visa before it even had a chance to arrive. The 24 buckets of Growth Booster were loaded into his truck upon their arrival to WellSave. Maggie had insisted on entering the store and browsing for anything she may have forgotten from her trip to Kipley's, generating even further spending. Who was he to argue? He was only responsible for the household's sole income, and the only one who seemed to care about falling into bankruptcy. Maggie rushed down an aisle and took a tray of pink zinnias from a tall rack and returned. She held them before Earl's nose. He sharply turned away. "Aren't they just the sweetest things?" she cried. She held them close to her lips. "Hello, little ones," she whispered lovingly. Turning to her husband, she exclaimed, "Well, we have to buy them now. Did you see the way they looked at us?" Maggie bent over the handle and gently added them to the cart. Every time Maggie left the cart to retrieve another expensive item, her phone was left behind to Earl's devices. Each time she departed, he had the opportunity to open her texting app and delete his recent messages to her. Under the current circumstances and due to the state of his mood, he denied the venture every time. The couple passed the pet section, where Earl noticed an abundant selection of bargain-sized cat food, treats, and special diet formulas. His attention changed tracks. "Have you seen Bella?" he asked. "I didn't see her this morning." Her eyes wandered sincerely. "I didn't. She wasn't in her spot by the TV?" she asked. "She didn't get out through the back door, I know that." Earl decided to drop any further inquiry. He wondered if the tuna he had given her was somehow related to her disappearance. To his memory, she had never fallen sick in his care. He remembered reading somewhere that cats sometimes change their behavior if inflicted with any kind of ailment. he decided to check the house thoroughly as soon as they returned home. They slowly approached the rear of the warehouse. To Earl's dreadful surprise, the ForeverGreen demo table and its enthusiastic sales rep were still present from the day before. The banner now read, ForeverGreen Environmental Awareness Enhancer. Maggie clapped her hands excitedly and raced to the display. Earl shat his metaphorical pants. Your chlorophyll kiddos are far more attuned to their surroundings than you think, and this new consciousness-enhancing formula will open up their little receptors to the maximum amount of love and affection you give to them on a daily basis, the woman announced. Earl had forgotten her high-pitched shrill. The ForeverGreen rep's blinding expression was the last face he needed to see today. Maggie nudged him with her elbow. See? I told you my petal babies knew what I was saying to them. The woman's eyes fell on Earl. It was obvious she remembered his ignorant frown from yesterday. She resumed her pitch. Just 4 applications of ForeverGreen's Environmental Awareness Enhancer applied with this spray hose and solar-powered electrical pump will have your root rascals greeting you with the sunrise, gossiping over afternoon tea and bidding you a restful and sweet dream good night, she cheered. Let me guess, it can't be used with any other stimulants or additives, Earl mumbled. I'm sure that's implied, Maggie whispered. We're definitely getting that. He responded like a soulless robot. Why the hell not? He surrendered. Before I open up the floor for sales, I'd like to give you a sneak peek at ForeverGreen's upcoming remote interaction system that allows you to converse with your children from anywhere on Mother Earth. The rep reached under the table and placed a large white box before her, with the label facing a sea of astounded expressions. The product's image resembled a desktop monitor connected to a cylindrical canister of pressurized air. Our soon-to-be-released Flora text station gives you the ability to send positive and encouraging words to your garden, while simultaneously delivering a healthy spritz of carbon dioxide with every text message. Earl was sent into a completely new dimension of perplexity and indignancy. Reality itself seemed to fall away, leaving him as the only logical mind among the irrational, over-credulous, and absurd. He shuddered from the painful levels of stupidity. The rep continued, Soon you can take that trip to Maui, visit your aunt in New York, or visit Phoenix's breathtaking desert botanical garden without the worry of denying your seedlings and cultivated cuties of your much-needed inspiration and life-giving breath. Tears actually began to stream down the faces of every female onlooker, including Maggie. A slow clap began at the back of the crowd and erupted into thunderous applause as though a war had just ended and those oppressed by the conflict were freed from tyranny. We're getting one of those, Maggie hummed in his ear. Are you insane? He spat angrily. Earl shook with outrage as his argument went completely unheard due to the uproarious excitement. All he could do was glare bitterly at the sunny representative as the group continued to applaud. His financial state was doomed beyond time. For a moment, he considered taking on a second job, joining the electrical workers' union to double his income, or taking a detour past Echo Canyon Forest Preserve, strangling Maggie with a garden hose, and leaving her in the desert for dead. The latter seemed the more reasonable of the three. Maggie turned to him with a kind-eyed grin. Don't worry, she said. I'm not going to rack up our visa with charges. I know how you get about major credit cards. Her tone was calm and earnest. She almost displayed a sense of responsibility. Earl eyed her. Her tone heightened. I opened a WellSave Savers account. They only charge a 28% interest rate and offer special financing options on purchases over $2,000 per visit. Earl sat in his chair. He could hear the electrical whir of the solar-powered pump as Maggie gave her second dose of awareness enhancer to the oleander trees and patio greenhouse pots. Bella was still nowhere to be seen. As planned, He had checked every square foot of the house for her orange coat and white stripes when they had returned home. Alas, no Bella. He took a bite of cake and a sip of coffee. The flavor offered no relief to the hell Earl was inevitably spiraling into. All day, he had not raised a fuss to Maggie, and all day she had remained kind, affectionate, and cooperative. But at what expense? Her mood would surely change when the credit dropped, the money ran dry, and the house foreclosed. That was the cost of harmony. The doorbell shook him in his seat. He set the dishes aside and answered the door. A different pest control tech stood happily on the step in the same uniform and equipped with the same sprayer as the man from before. "Mr. Pike?" he chimed. Earl nodded. He didn't have the energy to display the same sunny attitude he retained yesterday. The man entered. "Cockroach treatment? Bathrooms and perimeter?" he asked cheerfully. Earl nodded again and gestured to his home's interior. The tech displayed a handsome tank strapped to his side and attached to the spraying apparatus. "This is Pest Ejector's new state-of-the-art formula that rids your home of roaches, rodents, and riggers so you can rest easy, knowing that—" The man halted his endorsement upon seeing Earl's face. His deadpan expression exhibited absolute disinterest in the details. "Just start spraying," Earl clapped. The man checked his phone. "It says here to leave the kitchen and the patio untreated?" he asked. "Everything," he barked. "Apply treatment everywhere?" the tech inquired. "Spray everything," Earl confirmed. The pest control associate jogged up the stairs to begin his round as Earl collapsed into his chair. He resumed his spiral of depression, self-loathing and despondence as another obnoxious commercial danced across the television screen. Exasperated, he snatched the remote and switched off the TV completely. Silence fell over the room. Earl sat impassively still as the tech descended the steps, treated the bathroom, and sprayed the perimeter of the kitchen. He slid open the patio doors and ventured out into the greenhouse. Another sip of coffee. Within the span of 5 minutes, he heard Maggie's shrill voice boom against the double-paned glass. Earl raged. "Son of a—" He leapt to his clogs and raced to the kitchen, mug in hand. In his rush, he tried coming up with an excuse for allowing the man on the porch. The easiest solution was to blame it on the tech. Claim that he never changed the instructions and just lie. He lacked the energy for any other option. What Earl saw on the patio sent confusion, relief, fear, and anxiety shattering through his body and caused his blood to run cold. He slowly slid the glass open as Maggie's delighted cries amplified. She clapped her hands and bounced before a tall, potted plant decorated in blue and yellow flowers and healthful curling leaves. At her feet, the tank of pest ejector fluid and its long spray nozzle rested beside it. "It's beautiful! I love it!" Maggie screamed with elation. Earl stepped onto the deck and frantically began searching for the tech. He darted around the corner, vanishing from her sight. "Where are you going?" she called out. Earl zigged and zagged through the yard and to the opposite end of the house. He thundered past Maggie and ran back inside, checking every room, the garage, and even the closets for the missing associate. At the top of the stairs, Earl snapped his fingers and remembered the van. He almost fell down the stairs, threw the front door open, and stopped on the walkway. Parked across the street, the pest ejector cargo van sat silently and ominously. Maggie watched her husband tremble with dread as he returned to the deck and stood beside her. His mug of coffee remained gripped in a white-knuckled fist. Earl's earlier suspicions about what had happened to the cat moved up a tier from unreasonable to probable as he beheld the 6-foot braided hibiscus before him. His wife continued to gush over its beauty and rarity as he lifted the tank and sprayer from the deck and set them against the house. In her excitement, she hadn't seemed to notice it. Where did you find it? She rejoiced. Wilson's, he lied again. He figured she'd believe anything after that ridiculous display at WellSave. Anyway, she only wanted a name she could share with her online plant freaks. Maggie pulled out her phone and began taking various pictures of the new edition, attaching a swiftly tapped comment to each one. Earl closed his eyes tightly, processing all he had witnessed over the past 24 hours and what the evidence suggested. His knees rattled and his spine twitched. If the ForeverGreen supplements did what they claimed, and their warnings were justified, it was possible that the drain cleaner had some kind of effect on whatever ungodly thing they used in the formula. He remembered what he had read on the bucket's label, and how discreetly it avoided listing several ingredients, shrouded by the excuse of patent complications. Earl couldn't believe he was accepting the ideas that shifted through his head. He rubbed his eyes. His grip on reason was becoming irrational, over-credulous, and absurd. Maggie threw her arms around his neck and kissed him on the cheek, squeezing him tightly. "Thank you so much, I love it!" She beamed with affection. Earl just stood in place, unresponsive and dispassionate, his expression vacant and his sanity slipping into madness. That night, Earl sat on the bed of his guest room and watched the clock slowly tick to midnight in the light of the bedside lamp. Maggie had long been asleep, and his coffee mug was still clenched tightly in his fist. He stood. Wary not to make a sound, he crept to the door and cracked it open. Darkness dampened the hall. Earl tiptoed past his wife's room and carefully descended the stairs. The kitchen was dark as he stood in the entryway. Swiftly, he switched on the lights. There was the tabletop garden, just as it always was. The crown sunflower at the center stared back at him. Gulping in the back of his throat, he approached the group of suspects. No motion, no sound, just a normal, everyday anthophile's kitchen. Lifting a nervous finger, he reached over and tapped on the sunflower's center. No response. His wariness subsided. He snapped on the patio bulb and glared through the glass. The greenhouse remained in the same customary state. And so did the hibiscus. Sliding open the door, Earl carefully approached the new plant. He needed something, some kind of proof. Proof he was sane, or proof he had lost his mind. He didn't care which. He examined the petals, leaves, and stems. He felt them in his fingers and even smelled them. Nothing seemed out of place. Earl lowered to his knees and rested his mug on the deck. Taking a preparatory breath, he pushed his hand into the potted soil, feeling around for anything other than roots. The fresh dirt was silky, wet, and warm. Was soil supposed to be warm? He thought. He dismissed the observation and continued to feel around, deeper and deeper into the pot. Suddenly, something rigid brushed against his middle finger. Gripping it softly in his fingers, it felt metallic and made up of several parts like a stack of coins. He wrapped his fist around the object and pulled it out of the pot. Crushing horror drained the color from Earl's face as he fell backward, knocking his mug to its side. Cold coffee spilled onto the treated cedar as he crawled backward in terror, moaning with unhinged panic at the sight and the state of his hand. From his wrist to his fingers, Earl's trembling fist dripped with coagulated blood. In his fingers and coated in crimson gore, he held a set of vehicle keys. The pest ejector logo was printed boldly on a hanging key fob. He looked with terror upon every plant on the patio. He saw every blooming bud as a face of vile evil, staring gruesomely back at him. He shot to his feet as thick drops of blood spotted the porch like rose petals. He stumbled into the house, threw on the sink faucet, and rinsed the human bodily fluid off of his flesh and into the drain. Earl tossed the set of keys into the sink and applied gobs of dish cleaner all over his hand and up his arms, frantically washing like a panicked surgeon. He made sure that every bit of gruesome evidence left by the affliction was scrubbed away, bleached and sanitized, leaving nothing behind but spotless flesh, polished steel, and the overpowering scent of detergent. Earl turned off the water and eased his breathing. Nausea and trepidation raced through his trembling body and quivering lips. He looked to the plants resting on the table. Probability for his suspicions had now become absolute certainty. Something had to be done. They had already taken the cat and the pest control man, and it was only a matter of time before they got their murderous vines on himself and on Maggie as well. With no other options to think of, Earl snapped into action. The indoor garden watched wickedly as he threw open the cabinets below the sink and retrieved every single bottle that displayed a warning label. Soaps, sanitizers, powders, and sprays were gathered between the sink and the coffee machine. He rushed to the pantry and pulled bleaches, surface finishers, and a well-save-sized box of weed killer from the floor and added them to his arsenal below the glow of the kitchen light. For a second, he thought of dousing both gardens in gasoline and setting them on fire, but the scent of smoke would surely wake Maggie. There was also the chance of burning down the house. For a moment, Earl considered that as an option as well, then quickly dismissed it. Drowning the potted demons in every lethal chemical he owned was his only option. Upon finding them dead, Maggie would surely never use a ForeverGreen product again. Earl slid open the patio door and worked quickly. He added a life-killing dose of household poison to every pot, and with sickening hesitation, to the hibiscus and the orange pixie as well. He smiled madly as sweat dripped down his forehead. "Take that, you little monsters. You won't get your thorns into me. Never," he whispered insanely. Earl could almost hear their delicious little screams as he flooded their pots with imminent death. He lifted the last tall bottle of bleach in his armory and shifted on his bare feet to the tabletop garden, unscrewing the child-proof top. "Earl?" A groggy voice moaned from behind him. He jerked his head away from the prize-winning sunflower and melted with dread. His body froze, holding the white bottle of bleach over his wife's most coveted of potted babies. "What are you doing?" she asked. Maggie stood in the entryway to the kitchen in daisy-print underwear and a thin forest green top, whimsically displaying the words, "Sometimes I wet my plants." Her messy red bangs framed her timid and horrified expression. Her breaths quickened with panic. This had been the first time in Earl's hundreds of midnight visits to the kitchen that Maggie had woken up and descended upon him. His mouth fumbled for words. He was left with nothing but the truth to explain his actions. "ForeverGreen is turning everyone in the house into plants," he blurted out. "That's where the lilies and the hibiscus came from. Bella and the pest control guy were turned into flowers. They need to be stopped." His voice cracked. He heard the faint chatter of laughter resonate from the flowers behind him. "Shut up," he roared at them. Maggie was smitten with malignancy and disbelief. "You said you bought those from Wilson's." She moaned with dejection. Earl grew aggravated. After everything he had just told her, the fact that he had lied about buying her flowers was the first piece of information she had reacted to. "Why the hell would I buy you more weeds?" he barked. "And did you not just hear what I told you?" Maggie eyed the bleach. She brought her shaking hand to her mouth and began to sob. "Are you killing my babies?" she asked tearfully. Earl straightened his back and slammed the bleach bottle on the counter beside him. He spoke coldly. "Not if they can help it. The drain cleaner I poisoned them with yesterday didn't stop them. Why would anything else?" he growled. What I should do is burn them alive." She sharply drew a finger in his direction. "Get away from them!" she screeched. Tears cascaded down her face. "If I see one sign that you've harmed them in any way—" Maggie's sentence was cut short. One by one, every plant on the table shriveled, wilted and turned from a healthful green to an anorexic gray. Small, dehydrated leaves fell from their stems and floated to the wood of the table. Earl was on to their ruse. He boiled with contempt for their phony display. "You melodramatic little bastards," he muttered through his teeth. "I want you out!" Maggie screamed. "Get your things and get out! I don't want to see you here in the morning. Not then and not ever again." She slapped her ankle-socked foot against the tile. "And then what, Mags?" Earl belted. "You'll sell everything we own to finance a new row of azalea bushes for the front yard and continue to sing to your flowers and not work like you've done for the past 10 years. I've paid for everything in this house, and your new obsession with ForeverGreen is going to leave you forever in the red and out on the street. Not to mention those new credit cards you opened without my permission. Who's going to pay those off?" His breaths shook. Maggie wiped the moisture from her reddening cheeks and crossed her arms. She lifted her brow in preparation to deliver a logical and rational response to his well-grounded objection. She spoke. "Azaleas don't grow in this climate, Earl. Arizona is too dry and too hot for their ideal growth and seasonal bloom." Earl closed his eyes and sighed with resignation. "You'd know that if you ever once paid attention to me and what I'm interested in," she cried. The couple stood in silence. The hum of the kitchen light buzzed over the thick and wavering tension. Earl shook his head. Maggie would never open her eyes to the real-world problems that affected adult life. He had kept her too long and too far detached from financial planning, budgeting, and anything else that sustained her carefree lifestyle. Every time he complained about money, she saw only gripes and bitterness towards what she was spending their money on. She wouldn't survive without him, his income, or his administrative responsibility. And sadly, she didn't have a clue. Earl's voice softened with mercy. "Look, Mags, if you'd just please listen to me for a second," he begged. "No," she barked. "I want you out." She turned her back. Her braids swayed as she ascended the stairs. "I don't want to see you in this house again," she said. Maggie stepped to the landing and continued to cry. Earl heard the hollow slap of her bedroom door close with adamant conclusion. Alone in the kitchen, Earl exhaled through his nose. He did his husband best to think of everything through his wife's perspective. Alas, every thought that came to him was met with stern protest. He began to question himself. Had he actually gone crazy? Were the plants completely innocent? Did the cat finally take enough of his monotonousness and run away, along with the missing pest control tech? What about the blood on the deck and in the hibiscus? That was the only sure proof he possessed. The only proof he hadn't gone completely insane. He walked to the open glass door and flipped on the lights. The thick drops of blood were nowhere to be seen. Only small piles of topsoil were spotted across the deck. He approached the tall hibiscus. Evidence that he had dug through the pot was present, along with spilled dirt left in clumsy mounds surrounding it. Earl fell to his knees and began to dig. He uprooted the entire plant and found nothing but potting soil and smelled nothing but earthy must and ForeverGreen additive. No gore and no blood. To his confusion, the spray nozzle and pest ejector tank were gone as well. Leaving the hibiscus askew, he ran into the kitchen. The keys were no longer in the sink, and any trace of bodily fluid was washed away by his earlier tenacity. The van, he thought. Earl rushed to the front door and threw it open. Across the street, he clearly viewed the neighbor's house. No van and no evidence that pest control had ever been there. Had it been towed? he thought. Or had his company come by to pick it up? If they had, why had nobody showed up to question him about the missing employee? Earl slowly closed the door and gave up. He was insane, he concluded. It finally happened. Maggie had finally driven him to the end of his rope and plunged him headlong into mental instability, just as he'd always feared. He locked the front door, did the same with the back patio, and took one last look at the kitchen garden. Earl flipped off the lights, sighed with defeat, and began the long, depressing hike to his personal guest room. Every stair creaked, and every grip on the banister's handrail moaned as he ascended to the lightless hall. His bare foot made contact with the landing just as a sharp, familiar sound echoed from the kitchen below. Earl froze. After a series of ominous seconds, the meow came again. Then again. Bella's hungry cries could clearly be heard from her spot beside the filled bowl of cat chow on the kitchen floor. He whirled around. "Bella?" His voice cut through the darkness. She meowed again. With everything having gone seemingly back to normal and his perception clear of illusions, he realized Bella's return wasn't completely unreasonable. Had he not noticed her during his brush with dementia? Had he been ignoring her this whole time? Those were the only logical answers. Excitedly, Earl jogged down the steps, jumped into the kitchen, and illuminated the lights. His terror returned in full force as he beheld the dining room table. Every potted flower in Maggie's indoor display was gone, with the exception of one. The striped orange pixie lilies sat in their pot at the center of the table, healthful, vibrant, and sinister. The weight of the sight was suffocating. Earl gulped. The meow came again. Not from the floor, but from the lilies. Against his better judgment, Earl approached. "Bella?" he called again. His tone vibrated with fear. Standing over the blooming petals and curling leaves, he shivered. The tile was cold against his feet. His heart pounded like a funeral drum. Suddenly, the largest of the flowers retched forward and began to cough. Earl stumbled backward. The lily spat and choked as if regurgitating a hairball as the pot shifted across the table's surface. With one last heave, the orange and white flower coughed up a red collar attached to a dangling copper tag. The name, Bella, reflected across the tag's surface in the glint of the kitchen bulb. Earl reacted. His plunge into madness resumed as he whirled around and flailed out of the kitchen. His shoulder collided with the edge of the drywall, sending his body's weight onto the rug of the living room. Gripping his arm and clenching with pain, he attempted to push himself up. Inches from his nose and resting on the carpet was Maggie's new tray of pink zinnias. The sight sent him stumbling back again. Earl got to his feet and flipped on the lights. Every plant in Maggie's collection was positioned in various locations throughout the living room, blocking his path to the front door and every window. The end tables, the couch, his recliner, and the coffee table were decorated with roses, orchids, geraniums, and violets. Every petal stared lifelessly and demonically back at him as he hyperventilated with panic. He heard a sound behind him. Earl turned to see every patio plant in the same array obstructing his escape through the opened patio door. His only clear path from certain death was up the stairs and to the hall. Without a second to think, Earl took it. He gripped the handrail with white knuckles and tumbled up the steps. Abruptly, he felt something leafy seize his ankle, causing him to fall. His throbbing shoulder hit the stairs, and his chin crashed against one of the rungs of the banister. Blood dripped from his mouth upon biting into his tongue. He yelped in pain, but did not dare give up. Crawling as hastily as he could, Earl climbed up the steps and reached the landing. Chirping giggles and maniacal cackling erupted from the living room as he attempted to flee the diabolical garden of possessed plant life. He dragged himself to the foot of Maggie's door and opened his eyes. There, just between his face and the door to Maggie's master bedroom, her prized spotted sunflower stood imminently waiting for his approach. Eyes glazed by tears and his throat dry with anxiety, Earl looked upon its featureless face. In one atrocious instant, two green, horrendous eyes opened at the center of its flowering canary mane. The threatening glare of its abominable serpentine pupils sent Earl into a formidable fit of transcendental horror. At the heart of Earl's Arizona subdivision, his fearful and panicked screams boomed across the empty streets, through the sleeping trees, and into the humid Arizona air. Weeks later, Earl rested in a comfortable flower pot on Maggie's tabletop garden. He was positioned beside Bella's white stripes and ivory-tipped petals. A cockroach happily perched on one of his leaves and ate aphids from his healthy stems. Before him on the table was ForeverGreen's newly released Flora text station. With a friendly chime, a message from Maggie appeared across the screen as a healthy spritz of carbon dioxide emitted from the life-giving device. Her message read, "I miss you, babies. Mommy will be right back with more growth booster for you all. I love you, my botanical beauties." Earl K. Pike was a happy plant. Likely, this was due to the fact that his receding hairline was no longer a problem. He had a new pet that found him interesting, and money was no longer a problem he possessed. Even more likely, his happiness was due to the fact that after a decade of loveless marriage, his wife had finally sent him a text message. This was a reading of ForeverGreen, Plant Life, Long After You're Gone. Copyright 2025, Mark Stephen Nordlund. All rights reserved. This is a Boohouse Books book. BoohouseBooks.com.